What up, my friends? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're doing one of my favorite videos, which is where I just sit down and I chat about the books that I read in the previous month. So we're going to be going over all of the books that I read in the month of January. We have a pretty good mix of different genres this time. I tend to be very heavy in the romance area. Specifically lately, I've been loving historical romances, but I do have a fantasy, at least one. I know I have one or two thrillers. I do even have a couple nonfiction books that I want to talk about. So we've got a lot to go over. And I somehow managed to read quite a bit in the month of January, which is really weird because I feel like it was a very hectic month for me. But I also turned to reading to try and get myself through very stressful times. So anyways, that was a tangent. In these videos, just to let you know, these will all be spoiler-free reviews. So I'll give you a little bit of a summary of what the book is about. Just a couple sentences on it, and then I'll share my thoughts without doing any spoilers. I'll also give a rating for both the overall book and how I felt when I walked away from it, as well as the spice factor, so you know if there's any spice in the book, if you're not comfortable, or if that's something that you prefer. So let's dive right in. I started off the year with a spicy romance, and it was called The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This one I actually gave a 3 out of 5 for stars and 1 out of 5 for spice. This one follows Shay, who's worked in the radio industry for about 10 years, but she's been really behind the scenes. She finally has an opportunity to pitch an idea to the bosses above her, and they go for it, but they insist on pairing her up with her obnoxious coworker, and they're thrust into a scenario where they have to pretend that they used to date. So they have to figure out a way to work together through this scenario and put their animosity aside. So overall in this one, I'm going to keep it brief. I don't like dogging on books. I just don't think this one was for me. I can see there definitely being an audience that would appreciate it. It just felt very awkward, not natural. It felt like the interactions were very forced. There were some really beautiful moments, so that's what kept me reading in the book. They did do a pretty good job at diving into kind of some of the injustice in the radio industry, if you will. Characters just were not for me, so it made me very difficult to be invested in themselves, the individual journeys, or their relationship as a couple. So overall, it's just not one that I'd recommend rushing out to grab. Okay, the next one is called One Dance with the Duke by Tessa. This is a historical romance. I gave it a 4 out of 5 for stars and 2 out of 5 for spice. This one follows Amelia, who has a beloved brother who just can't seem to stay out of trouble, and she is desperate to get some of his debts forgiven, so she boldly steals a dance from the Duke of Moreland, and he is so shocked by her audacity that although he doesn't plan to help her brother, he proposes to her a solution for everybody involved. This one, I really enjoyed it. It wasn't a solid 5-star for me. I gave it a 4. But it was the witty banter is what kept me going in this book. I just enjoyed it so much. There was a lot of repetitive moments, and there was a lot of like back and forth, and it didn't feel like the good back and forth. Like the tension wasn't all the way there. It was just more on like the frustrating and, like I said, repetitive side. But overall, I just thought the characters were so great, and I just loved the energy that they had between the two of them. There was also a sprinkle of a mystery in the background, so that's always fun for me in books because I always like there to be some extra layer to books. So overall, if you're looking to pick up a historical romance and you haven't read anything by Tessa, she's one that I've recently been exploring and I really enjoy. The next one that I read was called In a New York Minute by Kate Spencer. This one is a contemporary romance, and it does have spice in it. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 for stars, and I gave it a 1 out of 5 for spice, so pretty limited on the spice. This one follows Franny, who's recently had a string of bad luck, including getting laid off from her job, and she thinks it can't get much worse when she jumps on the subway in New York City and her dress ends up getting stuck in the door. She ends up being rescued by a handsome stranger, and the entire thing is recorded and goes viral online. So the two of them end up being forced to see each other again, but it ends up being an awkward interaction, but both of them could benefit from trying to team up. Okay, so I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 when I rated it on Goodreads, and I'm not one to take back my score. But like now that I'm looking back on the book, I think that it's more on like the 4 out of 5 side because I do remember really enjoying it. I also felt like the plot was very unique from other books that I've read. And I felt like it was a love letter to New York City. Something about the writing, it was just so descriptive with the scenery. It started off incredibly strong. And I like, as soon as I started reading it, I was like probably 25% in. I had already texted it to a couple of my friends and said, get it on your list, because I was really enjoying it. But then I feel like it lost a lot of the steam that you get from the beginning, and it started just getting repetitive because there was a will they or won't they situation that just seemed to drag a little bit longer than necessary. I also had a hard time with the consistency in terms of the maturity of the two characters. It was relatable in a way because it didn't feel like filters were put on or there wasn't this like perfect love story, but it just wasn't enough to like completely wow me, but it's enough to make me want to read more from the author. The next book, you guys, oh my goodness. Okay, first of all, I just have to get this out there and say that I am a huge Sarah Adams fan. So when I read her books, there is going to be this fangirl aspect that I cannot help. Take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but I've read a lot of romances. So if I suggest a romance book, as strongly as I'm about to suggest this one, know that it comes from a place of me having a lot of other material to compare it against. But Sarah Adams released a new book, Beg, Borrow, or Steal. It's a contemporary romance. There is a little bit of spice in it, which she used to be a closed-door romance writer, but recently she started adding some explicit scenes to the book, but she tells you at the beginning in an author's note which chapters they occur in. That way it's kind of like a pick your own adventure book if you don't want to do the steamy scenes. And I would give the spice on this a 1. So this one follows Emily, who lives in a charming small town, and she's the girl that you can always count on. She's also a teacher, and secretly, she's an aspiring author. Although she's the town sweetheart to everybody else, the one person who cannot stand her is Jack. They've had a long-term rivalry together. He finally leaves town to go move to Nebraska with his fiance, and suddenly she feels like something in her life is missing and she doesn't understand why until he returns. Okay, so I don't know how not to be dramatic about my level of respect and admiration for the talent that Sarah Adams holds. She has some way of just pulling you into characters and just making you take on all of the emotions that they're going through and somehow relate it to your own life, even if they're not specifically your feelings. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. I felt like I was Emily in this situation when it's Emily's point of view, and when it's Jack's point of view, I felt like I was Jack. I loved the small town aspect. I loved the teacher aspect. I feel like that's not done as much in books. This is just one of those books that just gives you all the butterflies. It's feel good. There's enough emotion in it though to make you work through some things and have some insight. There was some really good background stories going on with the characters and a journey that they go on in terms of kind of healing mental health a little bit that I just thought gave such a beautiful element to this. But overall, it's just one of those books that you just walk away just feeling like a blubbery mess who's in love with love, you know? So I could not recommend this book more. This is from the When in Rome series, I think is what it's officially called. All interconnected and just absolutely adorable. They can be completely read alone, but you will have like background characters from the previous books, and I would recommend just reading all of them because the entire series is just darling. That's the word that I would use. And I just want to mention too, when I do these little summaries, I obviously put the pictures up on the screen with my rating and all of that. But if you ever want to, I always list down in the description my full list of all of the books that I read, plus my rating. So if you want to just take a screenshot of one thing nice and easy, that way if you're at the library or going on the library app or going to your favorite bookstore, you have a little list of the ones that I recommend. So if you've read books that I've recommended before and you know I'm a trustworthy source, then you could kind of look and see what my priorities are. And at the end of this video, I will give my top 3 books. That way you know which ones I would prioritize if you're looking for books to explore. All right, the next book that I read was called Slightly Married by Mary Balogh. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly, probably not. This one is a historical romance that I gave a 3.5 out of 5 on Stars, 1 out of 5 on Spice. So this one follows Aiden, who's a colonel with a deep sense of duty, and he makes a promise to a dying soldier, and that includes going to visit the dying soldier's sister and deliver the news of his death in person. The soldier made him promise that he would protect his sister at all costs, and when he gets there, he realizes the situation to achieve that promise is quite complicated, and it involves him having to marry her. Okay, so this book starts off very strong, and I was thinking it was going to be like a 4.5 out of 5 for me in the first half of the book. But then the situation just kind of drags on a little bit longer than necessary. But the things that I loved about this book is I felt like the family was told in a very real way for the time period, because they were not warm and fuzzy, but they kind of had almost like a silent support of one another. And although they didn't express their emotions in words, they did so in their actions. I thought that was a really refreshing thing to read. I enjoyed the characters quite a bit, and kind of the same thing with the male main character. He doesn't use his words very much, but his actions always showed that he was there. However, the communication aspect is really what killed me, because there wasn't much communication between the two of them, and a lot of the situations probably could have been worked through a little bit easier had they just talked. So that's why this one was a 3.5 out of 5, but I'm definitely glad that I read it. And it's one that if you've read a bunch of other historical romances and you're looking to kind of itch that craving of picking up a good historical romance, I think that it has a good amount of elements to make it worth it. All right, the next book is a thriller. This one actually hasn't released yet. It was sent over to me from the author and publisher, and I am providing a review on it honestly and voluntarily. This one releases March 25th of 2025. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 for stars and 0 out of 5 for spice. So this one follows Jane, and she's struggling quite a bit because she just unexpectedly lost her father, and her entire world feels completely disrupted. She ends up dropping out of school and is unsure what she's going to do with her time when she discovers a network of amateur sleuths that are trying to work through some current crimes that had occurred. She ends up finding solace in this community of people, and they team up together with the support of some news networks and police departments to try and solve some of these unexplained cases. This book was just not... I definitely can see there being a specific audience for this. I think that if you are into true crime podcasts, documentary style things, this could be the book for you. I felt like the author was trying to do something different and unique with this. The way that it was told was as if you knew who they were, like they were a famous person, and you were reading their testimony about what had happened. And it was like I walked into something I didn't understand. So I think there needed to be more of a explanation as to what was happening. If you happen to be into true crime, one of the elements I think that you would like is it does do a kind of deep dive into the true crime community and how they can find one another, and then how, I guess, disagreements can kind of happen, and how people can turn on one another and then come back to each other. And just that whole aspect would probably be pretty cool to read. It just was not a love for me. All right, the next one was another one that was sent to me from the author and publisher. And again, I'll be giving an honest review on it voluntarily. I always do on these. There's nothing more important to me than my integrity. So if I get a book sent to me, it's not going to impact the way that I deliver my feedback. This one, I don't even know what to call it. I think it's kind of like almost like a fantasy thriller or like a superhero thriller almost. I don't know. But it's called Breaking the Dark by Lisa Jewell. And this actually is a Marvel novel. This one follows Jessica Jones, who has her own private investigation firm. And she's approached by a mom who's concerned because she has twins that had spent the summer with their father, and when they returned, they just seemed to be off. And she's convinced that her twins have been replaced by other children. She doesn't know how to explain it, but she asks Jessica to take on the case. Jessica starts to look into it, and she starts to realize there are a lot of odd things that cannot be explained. Okay, so Lisa Jewell writes a lot of thrillers that I've enjoyed in the past. So when I signed up to get a copy of this, I thought that I was just reading a Lisa Jewell thriller. I didn't know that I was reading something quite different, and I am honestly shocked that I liked this book as much as I did, because I'm really not into supernatural things or superhero things or anything. My husband John is. He's obsessed. I liked the Marvel movies, but I always kind of like the more action side ones versus like the supernatural ones, if that makes sense. This one does have some supernatural elements to it, but I felt like the underlying plot was very easy to follow even if you're not into supernatural. It was more like a thriller or a mystery being chased. And I really loved how there was kind of like a dual scenery situation happening. Some of it is set in New York City and some of it is set in the UK. And I thought the author did an amazing job at explaining both locations. As I mentioned before, I always love books that are set in New York City, and it almost had that like Spider-Man local neighborhood style New York City that was being described, so I really enjoyed that. I think that if you're looking for a book to really mix up your reading, maybe you've been in a slump or something, so you need something to kind of switch it up. up, I think this one would be a good one to turn to. And even if you happen to not be into superheroes, supernatural like me, I think that it's a universal enough one that anybody could pick it up. The next one, you guys. Oh my goodness. Historical romance. I am completely flabbergasted that more people don't talk about this book, that I had never heard about it. I found it on accident, okay? It's called Edenbrooke by Julianne Donaldson. I gave it a 5-star. A 5-star, like a 10-star, if you will. No spice in this, so 0 out of 5 on spice, completely clean. This one follows Mary Ann, who is working through grief after losing her mother, and her father, who seems to struggle with his own grief, cannot take care of her and sends her off to go stay with her grandmother. Her twin sister is staying separately from her, and she invites her to stay at a stunning estate with her for the summer. However, on the journey to go to the estate at Edenbrooke, she ends up encountering some trouble, and it leads her to meeting a very mysterious man, one who seems determined to keep his identity a secret, and she figures out once she gets to Edenbrooke exactly why. I don't know if this is just a case of the perfect book at the perfect time or what it may be, but this book absolutely swept me away. I was going through every emotion. I had tears running down my face at one point. It was just beautiful. The book was just absolutely beautiful. The characters were breathtaking. The setting was breathtaking. The way the author takes you through it, I did not want to leave these pages. I did not want this book to end. I was soaking up every single word. And a lot of times when I read romance, I read it at a pretty fast pace. This is going to be a comfort read for me. It just had the most beautiful mixture of everything that I love. Miscommunication, but it was done in a really great way. There was witty banter. There was like self-discovery happening. And there was even a little element of suspense. Hopefully I've sold you on this one. If you happen to be in historical romance, or maybe you are considering diving into historical romance, I can't see anybody not liking this book. And I'm honestly still just shocked that nobody talks about it. It was absolutely beautiful. Okay, and because I read that one, I started going on Goodreads where it like will recommend to you, which by the way, my Goodreads will be linked down below if you guys want to be friends on there. It will recommend to you, because you liked this book, here's some other recommendations. So another historical romance came up, and this one is called A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. This one I gave a 4.5 out of 5 on stars and 0 out of 5 on spice. This is another one that I don't know how more people aren't talking about. So this one follows Kitty, who has only 3 months to be able to try and save her family for financial ruin, and in order to do so, she needs to find somebody with a fortune to marry. So she heads off to London with a very strict timeline, and things seem to be going her way. She has been maneuvering her way through London society and has even found a family to attach herself to, and someone that she expects a proposal from soon. But suddenly his older brother shows up and sees right through her little scheme and is determined to stop it. What I think this book would be perfect for, I think this book would be perfect for the person that has not read a historical romance. I think this one had a lot of like the modern language that makes it a little bit easier to follow if you haven't read a historical romance, but it had the timelessness that a historical romance has. So if you've been primarily reading contemporary romances and have been considering a historical romance, this would be one of my recommendations to start with, because I think that it's the perfect way to dip your toes into the genre that is historical romance. I absolutely loved this book. I loved the characters. I loved the way it was handled. I felt like the communication was done in such a healthy way. There's a little bit of an enemies to lovers situation, but there was like a mutual respect between the two of them. And the main female character just does such an excellent job at highlighting the injustices that women experienced back then. So if you're looking for an entertaining read that's just well balanced all over the place, this is definitely one that I would recommend. All right, shocking to no one, we have another historical romance to discuss. This one was called The Rogue Not Taken by Sarah McLean. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. This one I give a 4 out of 5 on stars, 2 out of 5 on spice. This one follows Sophie, who is the youngest of the Talbot sisters, and they're infamous around town because they did not inherit a title. They were provided a title because their father has new money, and that's never really accepted in society. And they're known for putting themselves in precarious situations to try and marry those with an established title. She's shocked to find out that when she confronts her brother-in-law, the rest of society ends up turning on her, even though he was at fault, and she decides just to to run away from all of it. The angst and toxicity in this one is dialed way up. So if you don't like toxic and you want something that's like butterfly inducing romance, this would not be the one. Most of this book is wildly unromantic, but there was something about it, something about Sophie, the main character, that just had me completely captured. So I did not want to put this book down. I was just so taken away by it. The main male character, I think his nickname was like King. I could not stand him. He was entitled, he was obnoxious, and he should have been groveling way more than he did in this book. But overall, I just thought it was such an entertaining read. Like, if you're looking for just drama and angst and a good escape, that would be this book. And this book had me so interested in the brother-in-law situation that I mentioned during the summary that I immediately went to go read the sister's book. This one's called The Day of the Duchess. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 on stars and 2 out of 5 on spice. So this one follows the brother-in-law from the first one that had betrayed his wife. He has spent years after that situation, it kind of fast forwards in time, searching for his wife, because after the betrayal, she ends up taking off and he realizes that he needs to right the wrongs that drove her away. She shows up demanding a divorce, and he says that he will agree to the divorce as long as she finds her successor. So she needs to come to his estate and try to find the next Duchess, his second wife, from a group of ladies. All right, so just like in the other one that I mentioned, this one is very limited on romance, very wild, very toxic, very entertaining, very much a jerky main guy who's not aware of how awful he is type thing. I think with this one though, the grand gesture that occurs ends up making up for a lot of it. But overall, like this one, the witty banter and the entertainment is definitely there, but the frustration was a little high on this one. So overall, I think it's definitely worth it if you're looking to escape, because I did not want to put it down. I was chasing the ending on it, but I also didn't like thoroughly enjoy it while I was reading it, if that makes sense. Continuing on the historical romance route, but this one is more on the suspense historical romance, which was a fun mix up. This one is called The Secret of Pembroke Park, and this one is by Julie Klassen. I gave it a 4 out of 5 on stars and 0 out of 5 on spice. So this one follows Abigail, who has spent her entire life envisioning a future with her best friend Gilbert. They've always talked about their plans to start a family, but right before he's about to go take a year abroad, he declares to her that although they may have somewhat of an understanding, he's not ready to solidify anything because he wants to make sure that they both take the time to enjoy life before settling down. Exactly as this is happening where he's about to go study abroad, her father's fortune is completely taken away from them and they're forced to go live somewhere else. They end up living on a distant relative's estate, and they find out that there's a very long mystery that's unfolding, and there's a reason why nobody has lived in this house for a very long time. This one was almost a full-blown thriller to me. It almost has like a bone-chilling type situation to it because it involves like secret rooms and hidden compartments and this estate that potentially could be haunted, that type of vibe. This would be such a good one to read in the fall, I think. The romance part I almost wish just didn't happen. The main character is kind of like dabbling between multiple suitors, if you will, and it just kind of took away from her feeling like she was pulled to any one person. So I didn't feel the connection, and I really didn't have an investment on who she ends up picking. So it's almost like I wish that that part just either was a straightforward romance and a little bit more in the background, or if they just had kept it thriller only type thing. The one thing that I do want to mention though is that this book was very heavily rooted in the Christian faith. Overall, I don't feel like I have a very specific religion that I follow. I don't mind reading it whatsoever, and I think overall faith is a beautiful topic. But I do want to mention it in case you are Christian. You may absolutely love this book even more because it is dived into quite a bit. I also want to mention it to those who maybe religion makes you uncomfortable. This may be one to avoid because it is very heavily discussed, but I felt like the way that it was discussed was not done in a preachy way, and it was done in more of a universal message way. So I think that it was handled really well, but I do just want to mention it in case that topic is something that makes you want to read it more or less. You know, I just want to give you all of the facts, that way you can make an informed decision before diving in. Because I was so obsessed with that book, Edenbrooke, by Julianne Donaldson. I picked up Blackmore by Julianne Donaldson. This one, another historical romance. It wasn't a full 5 for me. It was a 4.5 out of 5. 0 out of 5 again on the spice. This one follows Kate, who has taken a vow to never marry, and her plan is to follow her aunt, who is also single, around an adventure in India. Before doing so, though, her best friend from childhood has always promised that he would take her to family estate at Blackmore because he knows how much she would love it. So he is determined to fulfill this promise and invites her to go to Blackmore. But when she shows up, she finds out that his family is not excited that she's been invited to be there. This book, just like in the first one, I feel like I just fell into just a breathtaking book. The scenery was just absolutely breathtaking. The entire book was so breathtaking. It would have been a 5-star read for me. However, there's a very major situation happening. There's family drama that's going on that just was done in such a beautiful way, but it does not get resolved to any form of satisfaction for me. So I couldn't give it a 5-star because I felt like there was just such a build on this situation, and then at the end it just kind of fizzles out. So that was the only reason that I couldn't give it a full 5-star. But overall, both of the books by her are just phenomenal. And I'm going to go explore and see if there's any more from her. But I want to do like a little at a time, because I know by the time I get done with the books that she's written, I'm just going to be completely heartbroken. She just has such a talent for writing. All right, next one, I mixed up my reading a little bit and I did Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This one is a mystery, and I think it might even be classified as young adult. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, 0 out of 5 for spice. So this one follows Avery, who's having a really hard time. She's a teenager. She's living in her car. She's having a hard time at school because she's incredibly intelligent, but the school seems to think, because of the fact that she has a rough background, that something must be going on. She has to be cheating on scores and things like that. She ends up getting called to the principal's office, and she's convinced it's probably something to do with a recent test. She goes to the principal's office and she finds her sister sitting there with the principal and a stranger who's there to inform her that she has inherited the majority of a fortune of a billionaire. She's never met this man before. She has no idea why he chose her, but a stipulation in order for her to be able to get the money is she needs to live on his estate with his family for an entire year. And once she gets there, she realized there's a lot of secrets behind closed doors. This one captured my attention immediately. The mystery was done so well on it. The characters were not exactly likable in this one, but they were fascinating. So it kept my interest, and it also made it so I never really was rooting too hard for anybody if they ended up turning out to be the bad guy in the scenario. It had kind of like a Willy Wonka vibe to it. There was like a puzzle solving element. There's like family drama happening, a family mystery unfolding. There's a missing family member. There's a death that occurs. I think that it is on the juvenile side though, and I think a little bit more could have been done with it. It does end on a cliffhanger, but I feel like a lot of questions got answered, enough so that I want to read on in the series, but I didn't get left like feeling really frustrated or irritated with the author. I think there's 5 books in total, so it'll be interesting to see where this goes. All right, diving back into another historical romance. This one was Beast and the Bookseller by Eva Devon. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 on stars, 1 out of 5 on spice. So this one follows Elizabeth, who has been quietly managing her family bookshop because her father just does not have control of himself after they lost her mother. One of their best patrons, the Duke of Montrose, ends up showing up and telling her that her father has not been showing up for his duty of delivering books directly to the Duke. When he realizes that she seems pretty capable of taking over the task, he does allow her to do so, and they end up developing a very unexpected friendship. So this one, you can kind of tell from the title of it, there's a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast element that I absolutely loved. I felt like it had a sprinkle of it without just completely and blatantly copying the Beauty and the Beast plot, if that makes sense. It gave you a little taste of it without fully diving into it, and it took kind of like a refreshing turn on it. I really enjoyed the characters quite a bit. The only thing that held me back on this one is a lot of the scenes did not feel very well connected. It felt a little jumpy between, like it didn't flow as much as I would like it to. But overall, I think this was a good one, especially if you happen to be a fan of Beauty and the Beast. The next one, you guys, I brought an item to show and tell because I had pre-ordered this one. Sorry if you can hear my son. He's on the baby monitor. He just woke up from his nap and he's like playing or whatever. My husband's probably going to get him soon. But this is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I'll probably still put it up on the screen so I can give you my star rating. This one is considered a romantasy. A fantasy romance, if you will. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 on stars and 2 out of 5 on spice. Here's the thing. Both the first two books, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, were a 5-star read for me. I'm not going to give a summary on this, by the way, because if I give a summary on what happens in this one and you haven't read Fourth Wing or Iron Flame, then I would be giving spoilers away for those books, and I don't want to do that to you. I want you to experience the entire thing. So my thoughts are going to be completely spoiler free too. So if you have not read Fourth Wing or Iron Flame, don't worry. I'm just going to give my general thoughts on it. Definitely go read those first two because I love them even more. And I'll tell you why this one wasn't a full 5-star for me. The first 10 to 15 chapters is why this book wasn't a 5-star for me. And I am the type of person that I do not look at anybody else's reviews, summaries, anything like that until after I've read the book. Once I read the book, I found that I was not in the minority of that situation. A lot of people had a hard time with the first part of this book. I was incredibly confused. There were characters coming up that I'm like, who is this person? So I think that if you have not yet picked up Onyx Storm and you did read Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, probably going back through and rereading it or listening to the audiobook or at least looking up like cliff notes or something may be a good idea. I thought that I was going to be able to dive right into this and not be confused, but I was very, very wrong. That was the only reason why half a point was knocked off. However, once I got through that and once we got to kind of the meat of the book, it took off from there. What I loved most about Fourth Wing is I felt like Fourth Wing was action forward. There wasn't a lot of world building happening. It was based on the action. It was a very universal message, very easy to follow without needing maps and character lists and all of that. Then Iron Flame, I felt like it was a much deeper dive into the world that is happening, and history starts getting layered in and background starts getting built and the world starts to get built up. So I think that Fourth Wing and Iron Flame are completely different, and this book, Onyx Storm, is something in between the two. Once you get past the first quarter of the book, the action starts to build in such a good way, but it also has the world building elements that are coming in to make it a lot more complicated and to make you very immersed in the story and you don't want to put it down. I, at the beginning of the book, was literally having to negotiate with myself to finish a full chapter. I was having to like drag myself through the chapters, which was not my experience with Fourth Wing or Iron Flame. So I thought that was pretty crazy. But once I got past like the 15th chapter, I did not want to put this book down. I was very upset with any adulting that I needed to do. I also think this one started the character development in a way that I really needed, because in the first two books, a couple of the main characters really drive me crazy in a bunch of different ways. And I think in this one, the maturity factor is starting to increase. So it's making me really invested in the characters in a whole new light now. Definitely recommend these books, even if you aren't a fantasy reader, because I was not a fantasy reader before I read Fourth Wing. Not at all. But something about it, it has kind of like a Harry Potter meets Game of Thrones meets Hunger Games vibe. It's kind of like a little bit of all of them, and it's just done in such a beautiful way. I think the way that this one ended, it didn't gut me, but I'm like, I really need the next book to come out, but I'm not frustrated, if that makes sense. So overall, definitely a recommend for me. Would recommend the entire series. All right, next up was another historical romance, Just Like Heaven by Julia Quinn. This one I give a 4.5 out of 5 on stars, 1 out of 5 on spice. This one, I don't even know how to pronounce my girl's name because I think it's Honoria, but that just sounds wrong. That sounds like it rhymes with something you don't want in a romance. You know what I'm saying? So we're just going to call her Honora. I don't know. She's on a mission to find a husband, but she ends up getting sidetracked because her brother's best friend falls ill, and it's kind of her fault. So she steps in to be his caretaker, and it ends up derailing her plans. So this is from the author that wrote Bridgerton, and I really enjoy the Bridgerton series. I really like season 1 of the show. I haven't watched the other seasons yet, but I have read a majority of the books. I think I've read either 5 or 6 of the books from the series, and I really enjoy it. Very high on the drama, gossipy, that isn't always for me, but I find myself enjoying it. That's kind of what I was expecting when I went into this one, and I was shocked to find that that is not the style of this one at all. This book is not gossipy, it's not drama. It had like a more easygoing, lighter tone. There really wasn't a lot of drama. There also really wasn't a lot of plot, but I just kind of felt like I enjoyed the characters, and it was kind of a nice break to just enjoy characters and not really need to be overwhelmed by anything major going on. I don't know how to explain it. I think that it was done really well. I think that it's one that would be light on the heart. So if you're looking for kind of a palate cleanser between heavier reads, this ended up being perfect for me because I read it directly after Onyx Storm, which was a lot to take in. So it was kind of the perfect book for me. This one was not heavy on the spice until towards the end. It was really just kind of like almost a friends to lovers situation that I thought was done really well. All right, and then the next book that I read was actually a nonfiction, which is shocking because I don't read quite a bit of these. And this one was called We Should All Be Feminists, and I don't even know how to pronounce the name, so I'm putting it up on the screen. And as I mentioned, I will have the full list of all the books that I read down below. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 on stars. There's no spice in this one. This one is actually kind of just a short story. I don't even know if you'd call it a short story, but it's like an essay, maybe you could say. The reason why I picked this one up, I know that feminism can be a polarizing topic, and I'm not trying to push views on anybody, ever. If you knew me and you knew my heart, I would never do that. But it is something that I want to be educated on. You know, I think that it's important that all of us educate ourselves. So I looked up some titles, and I went to my library app, Libby, to try and see what was available. So I did some research on what they recommend to further research the topic, and this was one of the ones that came up, and it was one of the ones that was readily available. Most of the rest of them, there's a wait. So it's a topic that I will be exploring this year and I will discuss, but again, I know that it's polarizing, and I'm not here to shove any agenda down anybody's throat. That's just not my vibe. I feel like if you consider feminism to be polarizing, but you are a bit interested, but you don't want to be preached to, I feel like this might be a good one because I didn't feel preached to about this. I felt like it was universally talked about. I think that it helps that the person who's writing this writes it from a different cultural background than an American. I think that does help a little bit because I think that it gave it more of a generalized, universal view on the topic. It felt like it was incredibly insightful. The only reason why it's not a 5-star for me is because I feel like it was insightful and it talks about the roots of feminism, and it talks about feminism as an idea. I know that feminism is an incredibly complex topic, so I would never expect one person to be able to give a complete solution. But because of the fact that this author that wrote this was so insightful and it was so well written, I would have liked them to just provide some type of feedback as to what they think first steps towards the situation is. I just respected and admired the way she presented everything else, that I would have liked some type of a call to action. And it's not her responsibility to do that, and I'm not saying that, but that's something that I would have appreciated. One of the books that I want to talk about too, I did not get to finish it, so it's going to probably be in my February summary, but because I had made a commitment in my December wrap up, I did just want to touch upon it real quick. So the commitment that I made in the month of December was that in 2025, I was going to read one book per month dedicated to a state, one of the United States. The book that I picked up in January was for the state of Maine, and this book was called The Lobster Coast, Rebels, Rusticators, and the Struggle for a Forgotten Frontier. It's a very long title, and this is by Colin Woodard. Hopefully I'm saying his name correctly. Here's the thing on this. This book is really well done. So the fact that I haven't finished it is not an insult to the book itself, and I know that I've done other reading, but this is the type of book that I want to spend time with. So I've been doing a few chapters here and there when I can actually focus. So a lot of my reading that I do is when my kids are doing their own independent play, and I'm like sitting in the living room with them and they're kind of playing with their interactive toys. We do a lot of like Montessori style play. So there's a lot of times when they're independently playing, and I'll just keep my Kindle on the couch and try and do a couple chapters. However, I am supervising my children, so my focus is not 100% on whatever book I'm reading, which is perfect for historical romances and things like that, because you can kind of jump in and out of that without having to like reorient yourself in the story, if that makes sense. Whereas this Lobster Coast one, it's very historically based and there's not a lot of dialogue. So I find myself really needing to like commit to it almost like a textbook. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do one state per month, because if every state ends up being like this, I want to give it my full attention. So I don't know if I'll be able to end up getting to 12 states by the end of the year, but we'll see, because there's been a couple recommendations from you guys that they seem to be more like fiction based reads, but still about the state. So maybe those ones I'll be able to get through a little bit faster. But regardless, I think that this is a really cool challenge to take on, because the amount that I've learned already in this book is crazy. I picked up this book thinking it was all going to be about the lobster industry, which I assume we're going to be getting into now, but it really is starting out more of just a history on Maine itself, and it goes all the way back to like the 1500s. Okay, so that wraps up everything that I read in the month of January. Now we're going to go over my top 3 books. The ones that if you are only walking away with a priority of ones to grab, these are the ones that I would start with. First up, definitely Onyx Storm, but if you have not read the first 2 in the series, it's a must. You have to read the first 2 in the series. If you've been thinking about trying out a romance fantasy, definitely pick up Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, and Onyx Storm. And I'm a little bit jealous of you that you can read all 3 of them without having to wait, because now that I have to wait for the 4th one, I'm kind of sad. Number 2, definitely Edenbrooke by Julianne Donaldson. And then last but not least, Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. So those are the top 3 that if you're looking for some books to get out and read right away, those are my top recommendations. As always, I would love to know if you have any special books that you've read recently. Please let me know down below. When you guys give me the recommendations, I try to get them on my wait list on Libby pretty much right away. My library is usually pretty backed up, so there's been a couple recommendations recently that I've got that I'm waiting on. So if you've recommended one and I haven't talked about it yet, don't think that it's because I don't trust your recommendation. It's because I'm probably just waiting for it, and it'll be here at some point. If you love talking about books and you need some more inspiration, I do have an Instagram account called @KateChapters. I'll put it up on the screen, and it's always in the description box below. Over there, I share some lists and wrap-ups and recommendations. If you happen to be new here, hi, how are you? How's the family? Thank you so much for clicking on that thumbnail and giving me a chance. My guess is that you really enjoy book content, and that's why you're here today. But if you do also have any interest in recipe inspiration, meal planning, or grocery hauls, that's what the bulk of my content is over here, and I'd love it if you check out the rest of the channel. I do these book wrap-ups once a month though, and sometimes I'll pop in with some top lists. So there's definitely book content happening, and I'd love it if you join the party and subscribe if you enjoy the vibe while you're here. All right, well, I hope I delivered whatever you needed when you clicked on that thumbnail. I hope you're walking away with at least one great read to add to your pile, and I hope you have a magical day. Bye!